fellow bookworms to Tibra's Den. My name is Whitney, and today we are going to be talking about The Three Fates by Nora Roberts. As you can tell, this book has seen better days, but is still perfectly readable. This is my favorite book. I've had it for years. It's been through a lot, many moves, many puppies, and such. And when I didn't always take such good care of my books in my younger years. But this is my absolute favorite Nora Roberts book. Still holds true. Rereading it now, I love this book so much. So I'll kind of go into the premise of the book, and then I have a set of discussion questions for you guys. So once I get to that point, definitely listen to the premise, see if it's something you're interested in. And if you haven't read the book and you're interested in it, you can certainly go pick it up, read it, and then come back and participate in the discussion questions and kind of just ponder on them if you don't want to fully participate. Otherwise, I hope you'll stick around and see if maybe this is one you're interested in. The discussion questions I try to keep spoiler light, so nothing gets spoiled and you're really not going to know what's going on if you haven't read the book. But of course, there is always a little bit of a risk of some spoilers since we are discussing the book. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this. My channel started a year ago. My booktube anniversary was June 7th, and I started with Nora Roberts. Like, we started with her newest work at that time, which was Legacy, and I had it as book of the month. I broke it down by chapter sets and did discussion questions. So we're kind of going back to those roots, only we're just doing one set of discussion questions. So yeah, really excited to get into it. Of course, before I do, please remember to give this video a like. It really does help out the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you don't miss out on a thing. I just finished filming a book haul, and so I don't know if that will be up before or after, but same clothes because I just, filming back to back on in this case. But yeah, definitely go check out that video. There'll be a link down below whether it's before or after. So check that out. But let's go ahead and talk about the premise of Three Fates. So the premise is you have the Sullivans. So you have Malachi, Gideon, and Rebeeca, and their mother, Aline. And they have an ancestor. So they have this little heirloom that has been passed down from their ancestor. Their ancestor was a thief he was on the run from the cops. And so he was on the Lusitania when it went down, which that is a real ship that was sunk by German torpedoes in 1915. So it does have a little bit of that historical element there. And then also takes a lot from mythology as well, sort of. Because the Three Fates in this case are part of like the antiques and art circle, and they're these three silver statues, but the one character Tia is into mythology and such. So there is conversation about the Three Fates in mythology as well, but that's not like at the forefront. And there's kind of this conversation about how much is life determined by fate versus choice, which I always enjoy. And so yeah, it's just this adventure. Malachi kind of gets duped out of the family heirloom from Anita, who runs a well-known and well-established antique business. And so she's supposed to be, a reputable businesswoman, but the fates, the one that Malachi has, of course, is reported to have been lost when the Lusitania went down. Um, and there's kind of doubts that the rest of them exist at all, if they ever existed. And so their only really value is if they're together, essentially. So he got stolen from him by her, and of course he can't really go to the cops. So they kind of set out on this quest to retrieve the other two fates, and kind of try to backstab Anita, and she ends up taking it to a higher level, so the stakes get a lot higher in that case. And so it's not only about getting the fates, but then also making sure that she gets what she deserves as well. And so this grand adventure, and like I said, you have the Sullivan siblings and their mother, and then you have Tia, who has her ancestor was um the guy that Felix, who was the Sullivan's ancestor that stole the first fate, he stole it from Tia's ancestor, and Tia's ancestor died on the Lusitania, where Felix ended up living. And then you have Cleo, who is a connection to the second fate, which Tia's ancestor was on the way to go try to track down, make contact with who he thought had the fate, which in this case was Cleo's ancestor, and was true, like the fate is in her family. And then the third fate has a connection to Jack, um, who is like in security and such, and he's also a collector, so he decides, to get involved on the whole thing as well, and he does not like Anita. So, really, really fun book. Like I said, it has that little historical element, it has the mythology element. It is a romance, so that's definitely there, but it has that adventure element to it too, which I just love, and a good heist element as well. So definitely one, like I said, it's my favorite Nora Roberts book. So if you're interested in trying her, that is one I would try. I will say, this one does have more of a romance presence than some of her other ones, like some of her like fantasy books, but all her books have that romance presence. But yeah, this one is so good, and I definitely encourage you to give it a try. So we'll go ahead and jump into the discussion questions. I think I did 13 of them. And so we're gonna jump right in. And like I said, if you're interested in reading this book, don't hesitate to jump off, go read it, and then come back. And so that way you can kind of ponder. Like I said, these discussion questions are for you to take as seriously as you like, whether it just kind of allows you to ponder the book on a deeper level, or whether you want to actively participate in answering any of the questions that you find interesting at all. And if you're not thinking you're going to read the book, I hope you'll stick around, because maybe these discussion questions will entice you too. But the first question is, would you consider Felix a good man? And if you were in his place, would you have given up your life vest? And so we know Felix is a thief. Like, he was on the run from the cops, in the first place, and he was on the ship, and he was thieving at the time that the torpedo struck and the ship went down. So we know that on the surface he's not a good man, but he does give up his life vest, and while he's a thief, he's doing it kind of as a way to make ends meet, not because he's necessarily a bad guy. And we see that this event kind of changed his life. And if he was truly bad, he wouldn't have reformed in the way that he did. So I do think Felix is a good man. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure if I would have done the same. I'm not sure if I would have given up a life jacket. When you're in that life and death situation, you don't know how you're going to react until you're there. And yeah, you're thinking about survival and thinking about yourself. And he had that initial instinct, and he decided not to go with it. And so yeah, and we see that that had an effect down the line on generations later. So he is a good man, and I'm not sure if I would have done the same thing that he did. So number two, do you agree with Malachi's approach to Tia? What would you have done differently? And so I understand why he was cautious, and I understand that he was a bit embarrassed and a bit hurt, because he'd been duped by Anita. And so he probably didn't trust his instincts at this point. So I do see why he did the approach he did, but it still doesn't excuse it, because he was willing to use tactics that Anita did. He was willing to kind of lie and potentially use seduction if he thought that was the best way to get information out of Tia, which was not okay. He could have been cautious while still approaching her in a respectful manner, and he didn't do that. And even once he got more of a read on her, he still chose to kind of be very sly about trying to get the information out of her. And so if I was in his place, knowing, that I've been duped and such, I definitely would have still been cautious. But um he could have been charming, and he could have been a little bit more honest, I think, while still not laying all his cards out on the table, just bring up the conversation, be charming and such, and then when they're together, like, I have an interest, in the fates. Um, what can you tell me about them? And then he could let, like, well, I've heard, like, not giving that he knows more about them away, but he decided to be a little bit deceitful and use tactics that were slimy, essentially. So, and number three, is the Sullivan's claim to the first fate legitimate considering it was stolen in the first place? And I think it is, considering how it came into the family. I think he was planning on putting the fate back, and then fate kind of took a turn for him, and so the torpedo hit, and he, still had it clutched in his hand and ended up sticking it in his pocket. But initially, he was gonna put it back, and so I don't think it's any different than, maybe finding it. I mean, it's silver. I doubt it would wash up onto shore, but maybe finding it, in the wreckage, or treasure hunters, that go and find treasure from ships that have sank and such. Um, I don't think it's any different than that. And at this point, it's been in their family for generations. So why Felix maybe didn't initially have a claim on it, at this point, the family definitely does. And number four, Gideon takes a direct approach to Cleo. How effective would the approaches have been if used on the opposite women? And so, like I said, we have Malachi, who's being kind of deceitful. Um, and I mean, he really did legitimately like Tia, and he wasn't, going to go to, like, trashing her hotel room or other nefarious means. But it still doesn't make okay, like, his plan of action. But I think we see Cleo kind of having more of a mindset like Malachi. And I think if Gideon hadn't been so direct with Cleo, that he might have gotten more information from her, before she realized kind of what she had, essentially. But he was very direct and very upfront, and Cleo ends up kind of, taking it into her own hands, and not trusting him. Where I think if they had approached Tia in a direct manner, she would have been, she's likes to give information. So I think she would have been good at giving information. They still would have had to charm her, because I think, one of the reasons that Cleo or Tia was so spurred to act was because she was angry at being used, and, being underestimated. And so that anger kind of drove her to become a part of this group and find these fates. So I think in a way she kind of needed a little bit of that anger in order to spur her forward. I don't think she would have jumped in quite as much if they hadn't gone that route. And I think Cleo, if she had had information withheld from her, they would have been able to get information from her and maybe change things around before she decided to kind of, you know, do her own thing, essentially. And I think things would have turned out a little bit different in general if they had all made different choices, for sure. So, and let's see, number five, Anita and Felix are both thieves. What makes her worse than him? And so Felix, like I mentioned before, was kind of stealing to make ends meet. At this point, Anita doesn't need to steal. She has money. She has this well off business. I mean, she was definitely a gold digger and did her time to get to that point, but she has that. So she doesn't need to steal. Like Malachi mentions later on, she could have been upfront. She could have, lowballed him, like still not been a very good person and lowballed him, but she chose to steal. She liked it, fed her ego, and she liked that. So it's the core of who they are. Like Felix had remorse and he was thieving to kind of make ends meet, where Anita is thieving because she can. And she has like no moral compass at all, where Felix does. So yes, they're both thieves, but they do it for two completely different reasons. Um, and one is good at the core and one is rotten at the core. So number six, why didn't Cleo trust Gideon? Did she really not view Anita as dangerous, or was she overconfident in herself? And so, based on what happened in Prague, I think she had an inkling that Anita was dangerous, but she didn't really grasp how dangerous. Like she didn't see her landlady. She thought of it as kind of a game, and she definitely overestimated herself. I think, and part of the reason she did that was because why she saw the danger there, she didn't fully grasp it, and she thought it was a game. Like she thought it was a game, and so she did overestimate herself, and that was the core of the problem, was that overestimate, her overestimating herself. So, number 7, was obtaining the fates really worth the cost? And so we know, what it ended up costing. Um, and I don't think it really was, but like I said, they didn't know going in. Like they knew Anita was a snake, they knew she was dangerous, but I don't think any of them had any clue how far she would actually take it until she went there. And so I think, like I said, initially, was it worth it if they knew she was gonna go there going in? Probably not. But once they got started, like she needed to be held accountable for her actions, and the acquiring the fates definitely played a big part in that. So, once things kind of escalated, I definitely think them continuing on was worth the cost. Where initially, no, they probably should have just let it go, honestly. And number 8, in what ways did Anita underestimate the group? So she underestimated them in a lot of ways. We'll kind of go through the group. So you have Tia, and she's kind of in the same class range as Anita. But you gotta know, Anita came from like poor circumstances and clawed her way up, where Tia was kind of born into it. And Tia, was a bit of a hypochondriac and very anxious, and that's all Anita sees, is this woman that is beneath her, that is a little bit slow and stupid and just annoying. A bug you would just flick off is what Anita sees when she looks at Tia. With the Malachis, they're not in her class range. She refers to them as second class tour guides and such. And so she doesn't see them as having the smarts. Like she thinks that she outclasses them in all ways, especially with smarts. And so she just doesn't see them having the ability to pull off, and even touch her. And obviously they wouldn't have been able to if they didn't have the help that they did. Um, so yeah, she's definitely just kind of views them as somebody she can use, and she did to get the first fate. So, and then we have Cleo, and Cleo comes, her family is from a higher class, but she's kind of the black sheep of the family. So she sees, Cleo more as not a bug you just flick off, but a bug that you can stomp. That is beneath her in every way. Because Cleo's kind of the opposite story of her. She had a good family, and then she went down to the bottom of the barrel, where Anita, was at the bottom barrel and clawed her way up. And so she doesn't see Cleo as a threat either. And she just sees Cleo as an inconvenience, and somebody to get out of the way so she can get that second fate. And then Jack, she never saw Jack coming. Jack was obviously in charge of security and such. And so somebody who she viewed as working for her, but also a man that she can manipulate and use. And with Jack, she was also kind of blinded because Jack just didn't, he's a strong man. And that kind of excited her because he didn't just give into her. Like, she wasn't able to fully manipulate Jack. So that kind of blinded her initially to his involvement because she thought he was working for her and that she could use her feminine wiles like the tears and such to get her to help him, or get him to help her rather. And because she was blinded and she had that goal, to kind of that personal goal of getting him, to wrap around her finger, she was kind of blinded by him, I think, and that caused her to underestimate him as well. And granted, she didn't know his connection at all to the third fate, so she didn't have that information. And number 9, why the double standard with Rebeeca? The brothers are in the same boat as far as like the adventure, and the girls are doing the same thing with them more than as what she is doing with Jack. And so yeah, I think it's just she's their sister, and so they're trying to protect all the girls. Like they're trying to encourage them not to participate and such and protect all of them. But with Rebeeca, they kind of want her to just stay home. And she ends up coming in. And as far as Jack goes, like, yeah, they're sleeping with their girls and such and, shacked up with them. But Rebecca's their sister, so they have that protectiveness over her. And they don't know Jack, and why they know that they can protect their women. They don't know that Jack can protect Rebeeca, even though clearly he can. And I think it's just kind of that gut reaction. Like, you're our sisters, like, you have no business doing nothing with a man. And we don't want you involved in this dangerous mission, even though she had as much stake as they did. And like I said, they were kind of being hypocritical because the women they're shacked up with, they're all doing the same thing. And her and Jack weren't even sleeping together like they were. Their relationship on that front anyway developed a little bit more slowly. So it's just kind of the knee jerk reaction. And even her mom said, that like it's not fair, but you are my little girl. Like, you're my girl. You're my only girl. You're my youngest. Like, so yes, it's not fair, but that's the way it is. Like, it's different for your brothers to go running off, across the sea and such than it is for you. So, number 10, was making a fake attempt necessary, or should they have just tried for it? What about the Athens plan? How could the whole thing have gone wrong? And so they weren't certain where the fate was being kept, whether it was at Morningside or whether it was at her home. And so I think the fake attempt was smart in that aspect. But honestly, um, if it was just about obtaining the fate itself, definitely just going for it would have been a great plan. But they were trying to set her up so she would take the fall. It wasn't just about the fate anymore, it was about her answering for the things she had done. And so making that fake attempt was extremely necessary in order to kind of set her up. It wasn't just about obtaining the fate at that point. So 11, why wasn't just obtaining the fates enough? And again, it just goes back to her answering for what she did. Like, she upped the stakes. So initially, yeah, obtaining the fates, maybe making her pay for them in some way would have been enough. But she upped the ante. And it was no longer just about that. It was no longer just about family pride or being duped. It was making sure that she answered and she could not do this to anybody else in the future. Like, she's dangerous. She needed to answer for what she had done, and she needed to be taken out for sure. So, and let's see, number 12. Why all the relationships develop fast, Jack's and Rebecca's stand out. Why on one level they took it slower, on another it was basically love at first sight. Was it that, fate, or something else that drew them together? And so I personally believe it was a little bit of all three. Obviously, I don't really believe in love at first sight. I believe there's kind of a knowing, like there's something about this person that there could be more later on. And then I think love develops as you go, but I think there is a knowing, like, and then in this case, we do see how events and fate kind of led them all together. So that definitely plays a part, but there's also always that choice aspect. And so they had a choice whether to go and look, further for the other fates. They had a choice whether, excuse the cat, um, whether to, develop a relationship like I said, it wasn't all fate. There is choice in that. And Jack was very decisive. Like, he saw her, he had those feelings, and he knew what he wanted. And so he just accepted that. Where Rebeeca was a little bit more cautious, she thought about it. And that's one reason why she didn't just jump to sleeping with him, because she wanted to make sure of her own thoughts before she involved the more physical intimacy there. And so yeah, I think all three play a role for sure. And then stop, Fräulein. Go. Number 13. Do you believe in fate and or that choices made by one individual can have a ripple effect on generations to come? And again, I think it's a little bit of both. I definitely do believe in a little bit of fate. Like, I do believe that some things are just meant to be, and based on your choices or whether affect how that's gonna kind of turn out, essentially. And it might take you away from that altogether. But I do believe that fate does play a role, but I also believe that free will plays a big role as well. Like, you always have that choice. Um, and so who's to say that if Felix hadn't made the choices he did, that he would ended up on the Lusitania, and that he would have been there to give his life vest to Jack's ancestor. You know, you don't know, because he did make those choices, and he made the choice to give the life vest. If he hadn't given that life vest, they probably wouldn't have survived, and Jack would have never been born. And so it had that ripple effect because they did survive, and so Jack was born, and their family had a connection to the other fate. Where if they hadn't survived, who knows what would have happened to that fate, at all, you know. And if Felix hadn't stolen the fate and read the little note that Wiley had on the next fate, the lead he had on the next fate, then that fate might not have ever been found either. You know, with Cleo, because she didn't know what she had. She thought it was just a little good luck charm. So, definitely, I think it all kind of intermingles. Out of all the questions, I would love your thoughts on that one. Whether you read the book or not, what is life? Is it fate? Is it choices? Do we have kind of predetermined destinies and such? Definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'm going to go ahead and leave you guys here. Happy reading, everyone. Bye.